Welcome to the Monocle Banking Podcast this week, as always, curated by Monocle Solutions. And this week, we're going to Prieska in the Northern Cape, where a few farmers have gone a little nuts over pistachios. There's something almost irresistible about a good Karoo story. It's the harsh land and the stubborn people and long odds, and occasionally a crop that looks mad until it starts making perfect sense. We're going to Prieska in the Northern Cape, where David Muller and the Muller family group are trying to turn pistachios into South Africa's next serious agricultural export industry. The backstory is absolutely remarkable. In the 1990s, the IDC backed a major pistachio project in the region, but by 2011 it had effectively been written off. But a handful of farmers, including the Mullers, refused to let the idea die. Now Karoo Pistachios, with its Desert Emerald brand, is looking at a market being reshaped by some of the geopolitics that we see in the Middle East, being reshaped by climate, by supply chain diversification, and surging demand globally, and not least from the now famous Dubai chocolate craze. From just 20 tons last year, the ambition is to scale towards as much as 60,000 tons by the end of next decade, which would put South Africa in serious company globally. David Muller joins us now on the Monocle Banking Podcast from Muller Family Group in Prieska. David, before we get into global supply chains and export economics, just take us back to the beginning. What does a Muller family pistachio story in Prieska actually look like? How did this become more than just an interesting farming experiment for you?
Hi, Michael. Yeah, thanks for the opportunity. So I think it all kind of dates back to around 1990, 1992, when the IDC was still, I think, a bit closer to the original mandate of establishing or de-risking high value or new industries within South Africa. And they looked at the agricultural space and decided to establish high value crops and they focused on the nut basket. And they had a walnut project, pistachio project. Pecans, has been in South Africa for quite a while. Almonds has also been going down in the Western Cape, and a bit of cashews. And they decided on pistachios as one of the projects. And they looked around South Africa and identified this region as one of the ideal areas where they can grow pistachios, having the right climate, enough water, which is crucial, and enough land available. So that started around 1990. And I think what one must point out was they started from scratch. And anyone in agriculture would appreciate that everything can make sense on paper, and you can take a plant from exactly the same location, from one location to another country, and everything looks exactly the same, and it completely behaves differently when you move it to a different area. And kind of that's what happened here. So there was this massive learning curve they had to go through, lots to learn. And we are building on the back of that initial project that was established here.
And for those who are uninitiated with regards to pistachios, you refer to them as pistachio orchards, and they really are built for the extremes of the Karoo, aren't they? I think the climate is probably quite similar to where we see large export market crops grown in Iran and the Middle East. Is this one of those rare cases where South Africa's harsh geography actually becomes something of a competitive advantage rather than a constraint? What was that initial business case that you said, right, on paper, this should be an industry that we could grow?
Yeah, I think that was quite nicely worded. And in the introduction, you spoke about a stubborn people. And I think maybe in a sense, South Africans in general are innovative and stubborn. And definitely that's counting to us advantage. But so pistachios, it is a desert tree. It's a really hardy tree. It originates from the Middle East. It can survive on almost no water at all. And it absolutely loves heat. So the other day I was speaking to large pistachio farmers in the United States. They're the biggest producers in the world as a country. About 60-70% of world production comes from California. And we just spoke about all of the orchards. They have like 400,000 hectares of pistachios. And the best performing orchards, as a rule, in that valley comes from the hotter areas. And we sit with that heat and even more. So pistachios doesn't really grow below 32 degrees Celsius. So the hotter, the better. I think that's what counts in the advantage of us in the Karoo, is that we're falling here from the one extreme to the other extreme, and pistachios thrive within that.
We also, you mentioned it, we've got credibility in tree nuts, macadamias, when you think of Limpopo and Mpumalanga and pecans in particular. What capabilities can be borrowed from those industries, and what's completely different with pistachios, apart from the fact that they only grow above 32 degrees?
So, if you don't mind, I'm going to answer it like in a hypothetical way, but it's in a sense like raising children. So, there's a couple of principles that applies to all children. I think once you've raised one child and you get a hang of it, you understand what to look at, how to kind of, approach it. But as each kid has its own kind of personality, different temperament, different talents, that's where the real, I think, magic sort of comes in. And in that sense, pistachio is quite unique in the sense that it is this tree that has these opposing requirements. And it's one of these trees that has probably of a commercial tree nuts, the most restrained climatic requirements in terms of where it will grow, because it loves heat, but then it wants this cold in the winter. It needs a lot of water to grow proper yields, but it doesn't want to have the humidity or high rainfall. And what's also interesting about pistachios is that you have a male and you have a female tree, and those two need to synchronize. And that is an incredible challenge around the world, even now in the United States. I think so. If we think the Iran thing was a surprise for the market, we in for a bigger surprise came later the year, because they predict that United States yield is going to be down around 33% come August, July. And to put it in perspective, that is around 200,000 tons of pistachios that will be delivered into the global market. The whole Iran, the whole country produces around 180,000 tons. So
Wow.
there's another shock coming in. That whole drop in yield predicted, it's all about pollination. And I think that's one of the big challenges of pistachios that sets it apart from macadamias or almonds or pecans for that matter. I think the last note, I think in South Africans, again, coming back to that stubborn, hardy, innovative, extreme climates, the thing that sets South Africa, I think, as a country apart or as an agricultural country is that because we're not farming in Eden, I mean, we're farming in harsh conditions. And we do that in an environment where there isn't a lot of institutional support. So South African farmers in general are really high quality farmers, brilliant
Yeah.
farmers. And 4 years ago, 5 years ago, I was overseas and I spoke to the head of R&D at Wonderful Nuts, biggest pistachio player in the world, control about 30 to 40% of the world market. It's ridiculous, massive company. And this guy, I mean, we just spoke about farming, and he said, he's United States guy, said, what these South African farmers is known for is our ingenuity and our application of technology and forward thinking. And he just said, like Israel is known for water, and mentioned some other countries what they're known for. And he specifically said, and I just think it's a feather in the cap of South African farmers that we are really good farmers.
Yeah. Listen, David, or David, I should say, there are a few things South Africans can be proud of. The Springboks, right up there. The Kruger National Park, absolutely. And the quality of our farmers has got to be right up there as well. And receiving, with all due respect, very little support. I know there was a land bank, and we don't want to go down that rabbit hole. And when the IDC used to follow its mandate, there was that kind of support. But if you look at the comparative support that farmers get in other more developed markets, our farmers are just doing it with raw resilience and ingenuity and typical Boermakeplan kind of mentality. Coming to the puzzle, though, and I think you've dispelled the myth that for those who think farming is just plant the tree, water it, harvest the nut, pistachios are far more unforgiving. How difficult was it to crack the pollination puzzle in Prieska? And, what was it about that set you up for this opportunity now to step into a market that is going to be undersupplied?
So it has been difficult. There's been quite a road, and we've leaned heavily upon the consultants that was involved in the initial IDC project, and they were the guys that kind of really cracked the code or figured it out, so to speak. And what they pointed out was, while they were part of this project, they were going through this massive learning curve at such a rapid pace that it's almost like you don't have time to think about, what's going on. And only afterwards and having exposure to other industries could have brought it together. And at that stage, the interesting thing what's happened is that the problem we solved around 7, 8 years ago, the world is now solving. So we are sort of cross collaborating with growers in Europe and United States because we've kind of went through this. And it's again, what is your greatest challenge becomes your greatest opportunity because it forces you to focus on that and address it. And for us to solve the problem, the biggest thing was firstly understanding the problem and really diagnosing the problem correctly. And that's been one of the biggest challenges. And once we understood actually what was going on, then to start working on interventions or remedial strategies, that becomes a whole lot easier. But it probably took us around 3 to 4 years because you only get one shot at it per year to really kind of work out a strategy that was robust enough to be bankable. And even then, one of our strategies kind of worked 4 out of 5 years, and then 1 year it just didn't work. And again, we kind of had to go back and say, right, like our strategy is working, but there's some caveats here based on how the climate plays out in that specific year. And we had to adjust it. We had to build it even more robust. But it has been, I think, like to really summarize it, framing the problem is 3/4 the solution. Now, in hindsight, it sounds so simple, but when we were there, it was quite difficult understanding really what the issue here was.
Yeah. Yeah. Listen, you're talking about cracking something that has so many different variables because what you're talking about is this dioecious plant. So the male and female grow on separate trees. And you've got the females producing the nuts. They depend on the male trees for the pollen. So you've got everything from cultivar selection to male to female planting ratios, the row layout, the prevailing wind directions, the flowering synchronization, all of that you've got to get right. I'm not going to ask you to reveal the secret sauce and the IP, but if we look at this playing out, and you've mentioned the US dominating global output, Iran's a major player. I've seen a Bloomberg article that puts it at around 700,000 tons in the US. You said it 180 roughly out of Iran and Turkey at about 120. Where does South Africa realistically fit into that hierarchy if the Prieska thesis plays out?
So we'll never be a volume player. And there isn't a country left in the world to become a volume player to compete with the first four guys, which is states Iran, Turkey, and Syria. And that is one of the big opportunities in the pistachio industry is that currently, last year, I think the global supply of pistachios was sitting at around 1.2, 1.3 million tons. And the annual consumption, annual demand is growing anywhere between 3 to 6%, which, if you work it backwards, they need to plant 20 to 30,000 hectares of pistachios each year just to keep up with growing demand. That's not even accounting for orchards that's being taken out due to a shortage of water. And so what you find is that existing plantations are under tremendous pressure and there isn't really expansion opportunity. And also what counts in our favor is that we're producing a quality pistachio nut like in the top 10% in terms of quality. But our production cost is sitting at half of what United States does. And they're like 60% of world supply, which means we have this built-in floor price because as soon as the price drops below a certain level, United States get out. Like they can't farm profitably, but we're still making comfortably money. So we know that we can comfortably make this 10, 20, 30-year horizon investment because we know we have a floor price because our biggest competitor that controls 60% of the market, they twice the input cost and the production costs that we have. So, I mean, all things point to the fact that pistachio supply is going to be under increased pressure going into the next 10 to 20 years. And yeah, it's hard at this stage to find any place left in the world where pistachios can be grown that can actually move the needle. South Africa is not one of those. I mean, at best, we'll do 80 to 100,000 tons, which comes at that stage will probably be 5 to 6% of the world market. But our play isn't a mainstream. We are focusing on a premium segment.
Yeah. They're just staying with economics for a while longer. I mean, as I understand it, pistachio orchards are long duration assets. I mean, they can produce for more than 50 odd years, obviously 100. Requiring the patient capital up front. So what does the investment curve look like from planting to commercial production? And I've read some articles that reference nearly R1 billion of capital required to scale meaningfully. What does that money actually fund?
So the context is that agriculture in general is extremely capital intensive, and as I say, capital rich, cash poor. But you look at the investment curve of pistachios, it's the typical J curve. So you plow in money in the first 5 years, and then year 5, 6 you start generating an income. But at year 8, 9, you're already project positive, cash flow positive on the project. So you really have to finance it first 1 to 5, 6 years. And depending on how you slice your cake, it might be anything from 300,000 to 800,000 Rand that you have to sunk in a hectare per hectare to bring it into maturity. But once you pass that, then it starts generating profit at a margin of 78, 80%. Your underlying capital value of that land is probably sitting north of 1.3, 1.4 million. And I think that's the one thing that you also have to appreciate, that is all that money that it's almost like buying a building and revamping it. So if you want to think about it, it's really almost like a property play. You're buying a building, you're revamping it, and you're renting it out at a higher interest rate. Just plays out over a bit of a longer time period.
And, when you look at it, Casey Sprague from AG Capital makes the point that the real risk isn't whether we can produce cheaply now, we've demonstrated that, but whether we can lock in reliable yields and export quality through the cycle. Would you say that's a central bankability question? And would you say you've cracked that particular nut? Pun, obviously.
Look, I think obviously you can't take all risk off the table. And you always have, I think, the big question around your ability to produce the yield that you predicted you will be, and also producing the quality that you expect to produce. But the first thing is just to be very conservative in how you approach it. And our business models, I mean, we're overperforming 30 to 40% on our business models, but we kind of stay with all business models just because it kind of builds in this redundancy, because we are working with nature, we are working with climate, and those things change. But I think we're at a place where it's bankable. We know what our risks are. We have some strong idea how to manage those risks. We've proven that we can manage it, but it's always this unpredictability of what can happen. And I think it's part of agriculture. I mean, we're not technology space, we were sitting on a BlackBerry and tomorrow Apple's going to come out and suddenly there's another product on the market, and you that's not going to happen in agricultural space. People have been eating pistachios for the last 6,000 years. What you've been producing, people will still going to be buy. It's just your ability to do that. But I think we're now at a place where it is bankable. And just in terms of the capital investment that we are looking at, it is north of 2, 3, 4 billion Rand at least. It's really a massive opportunity for the Northern Cape.
Would you say, therefore, that it's got to be a kind of blended capital model? Because that kind of check size seems too big, maybe just for one private equity play. So it's got to be something of a blend of maybe private equity, development finance. Where do you see that capital coming from?
Yes, it is going to be a blended model. It is going to come from various sources, and we are currently speaking to a couple of DFIs, and we're also working on instruments, both listed and unlisted, to provide institutional funding, private wealth. It is private equity, private traded DFIs, to really provide everyone the opportunity to get into this space and help finance and help accelerate this opportunity.
Now, when you looked at this, you thought, okay, and you've said, right, we're not going to be a volume play, we're going to go premium, and you've got this Desert Emerald brand. Obviously, it's important to build a brand around Karoo pistachio rather than simply selling a commodity crop if you're going to go premium. But what's important when it comes to premium world-class quality in pistachios? Is it getting the size or the color or the split rate right? And how important is traceability and provenance then? Can Karoo grown become part of that premium story in the way that terroir matters in wine or origin in coffee?
So there isn't one answer when it comes to positioning yourself within the premium space. Obviously, the quality needs to be there. That is the foundation. The product needs to carry itself. And we do have something special here in the Karoo in terms of our climate and the varieties and how those two interact to produce a high quality product. And So that's the first thing. We do have the product, and that's because of these factors. But the second thing is then how do you position that product? How do you tell the story about a product? How disciplined, how doelgerig, how focused are you when you're telling that story? So we are very meticulous and very strategic in how we position our product and tell that story. And the idea, and it is going to become a product of origin because the story is about a Karoo. The story is about these pistachio varieties within the Karoo. And just the last thing is that this concept of a premium pistachio of origin, that already exists in the market. We don't have to go and we don't have to educate a consumer. There are pistachios from pockets in Afghanistan, Iran, and Syria that commands 3-4x the price of, let's say, your normal shelf pistachios. A good example, is Bronte pistachios from Sicily. You pay 3-4x those as compared to what you would buy normal pistachios on the shelf. So customers understand that not all pistachios are created equal. There are better pistachios. It is usually also a story of origin, in a sense, almost like wine. We just need to get that message across.
When it comes to capturing value through the value chain, processing seems critical as well. I mean, if you get growing right, but you lose margin in the roasting or the cracking or the packaging or the export, you've given away some of the prize. How much of the value chain do you want to control?
We are aiming to control the full value chain to be able to position the product as a premium product. So we need to have absolute control over the full value chain, complete transparency, like to agricultural practices. And I just want to say, it's like almost, you can't make a good steak without good meat, but you can take good meat and you can butcher it. So you have to kind of have the good meat, good chef, and presentation, everything. So yeah, we're aiming to control the full value chain and located right in the Northern Cape.
Amazing. David, just as we wrap up, there's obviously a personal stubbornness in this story that I absolutely love. 15 years is a hell of a long time to keep going when the market hasn't yet validated you. What did your family have to sacrifice to keep the dream alive?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think it's just love of the land, and it's just being here and being fascinated by something. So it's not paying a price. I think it's just enjoying what you're doing. And obviously there's ups and downs throughout that, but what the heart chooses, what the heart chooses.
Yeah. Was there ever a moment where you nearly walked away?
There were moments that I was really disappointed, broken. I think it's what's Churchill said, it's stumbling from the one failure to the other failure, but every time I just have to get up. I'm butchering that, but it's as long as you get up, that's fine.
Now, zooming out, there's obviously a lesson here for South African development policy. Sometimes the state identifies the right opportunity, but it lacks the patience, the operational grit to really make it work. Would you say that's fair? And just lastly, I mean, if we sit here in 2035, what are the lessons that we can take from this that we might be able to use in other sectors where there are opportunities in agriculture?
So this is actually quite a large conversation, but just on one aspect of this is I think South Africa is awash with opportunity. There's no doubt. And it's not a week that I talk to somebody about something that is an amazing opportunity for South Africa. And unlocking an opportunity, there's roughly two components. The one opportunity is factors that hinders that opportunity being developed, and then there's factors that assist that opportunity being developed. And I would say if we can just remove all of the factors that hinders opportunities to be developed, we don't even need to support it being developed. It will be developed by its own. Like I have no doubt in the capability and the resources of South African people. It's usually just those obstacles that really takes all the energy, drains it out of it.
Yeah.
And I would say as a policy perspective, start by removing the factors that hinders opportunities being developed. Just put it on an equal footing and people will run with it. You don't even need to support it or encourage it. And I think that's the thing in South Africa is that there's so many opportunities here. It's amazing. We just need to remove those obstacles.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. Less red tape, do the basics, make sure that the roads and the logistics and all of that work, and you can get your products from the orchard out to market. You don't have to worry about some of the things that are given in other markets like energy, and it'll be amazing to see what we can unlock in this country. David Muller, thank you very much.
Absolutely.
Of Muller Family Group and Karoo Pistachios. Just a remarkable story from Prieska.
Thank you, Michael.
Great having you on the Monocle Banking Podcast. Thanks so much for your time. Well, that's it for this episode of the Monocle Banking Podcast. Don't forget to like and subscribe and share amongst your network. We'll be back with you next time for more from the front lines of finance, and who knows, maybe farming somewhere in the godforsaken place of Putzonderwater or something like that. I'm Michael Avery. Take care.